Are you wondering about watercolor brushes? What kinds there are? Which kinds fit you the best? What size should I have? How do I clean them? How do I use brushes? Well, if you're wondering about those things, this video is perfect for you. Hi there, if you're new to this channel, my name is koivumaa and I'm a full-time Swedish watercolor artist. So in this video we're going to talk about watercolor brushes, because this is something that a lot of people painting watercolors are wondering about. So let's start with the first topic: synthetic hair or natural hair? Okay, before we start comparing natural hair brushes with synthetic brushes, I want to say that all brushes are different, and that's the great thing about it, because there is a brush for every painter, because your way of painting and what you prefer is not the same as the next one's. And it's important to have this said, because it takes a while before you find the brushes that you like, maybe, or you will probably grow into learning how to use the brushes that you have. Because every brush that you have in your toolbox is a great tool for your painting. So let's start talking about some differences between natural hair brushes and synthetic brushes. Natural hair brushes are known for having a great ability to hold water. But the development of synthetic brushes have come a long ways. So today, in my opinion, I don't see that much difference in the ability to hold water. So if that's a deal breaker, you could probably go with one or the other. Another feature that I want you to pay attention to when choosing your brushes is the ability to hold shape. Because there is a little bit of a difference between natural hair brushes and synthetic brushes in that aspect. Because synthetic brushes, in my opinion, they have a little bit more of a spring to them, which makes it easier if you want to have more control over finer details. While natural hair brushes, they are a little more flexible, and some people prefer that, but in my opinion, it's a little bit harder to control. If you're planning on getting your first set of watercolor brushes, I wouldn't focus that much on the comparison if it's natural hair or synthetic hair. I would focus more on having a good variation of brushes in different sizes maybe, and not spending too much money on the brushes, because the brushes will grow on you and you will start to learn how to use them. So let's look into a few brushes that I would recommend that you should have. If you're gonna go with only one brush to start with, I would recommend that you would buy a round brush with a pointed tip like this, because that's probably the most versatile brush that you can have, and you can do a lot with it. This is a synthetic brush from Princeton Aqua Elite, and it's a synthetic brush, and it's not that pricey, and it works really well for beginners to professional painters. And the great part with this one is it holds water really well, and it has a pointed tip here so I can do the fine details, and it maintains shape through the whole painting process. So a rounded brush with a pointed tip like this, it's great to have. If you're planning on buying more than one brush, I would recommend getting a flat brush or a wet brush. For example, like these. These are both synthetic brushes as well. This is from Princeton Aqua Elite as well, and the other one is Grandissimo Soft. And these brushes are great for wetting the paper if you, for example, want to paint wet in wet, but also it gives you different options as far as brushstroke techniques. So what brushes should you use for the finest details? You can either go with a round brush, size 0, size 1 or something like that, depending on what you prefer, but you can also go with a rigger, and the difference is, if you compare the two, that the rigger has a lot longer hair, so it can hold more water, and that's perfect if you're going to do long straight lines, for example. because if you're doing a long straight line and you run out of paint or water on your brush, you're gonna have to go back to the palette and get more paint and continue, and that might disrupt the perfect line that you're going for. So a rigger or a fine point round brush is something that you could probably have use for as well. If you're planning on doing bigger paintings, you should have bigger brushes. So my recommendation is, if you're starting out with watercolor, that you should probably start in smaller formats and with smaller brushes, because that's cheaper. But when you're ready to do bigger paintings, if that's what you want to go for, then you should probably invest in some bigger brushes as well. So this is a Hake brush, and this works real well for painting in big formats. But you also have to make sure that your palette works for the bigger brushes, because if you have a big brush, it's not for sure that you can use it for a small palette. So how do you clean off your brushes, and how do you take care of them so they last for many, many years? Well, the first thing that you shouldn't do is leave the brushes like this in the palette with paint on it, because the paint is going to dry and that's going to ruin the hair of your brush. So the first thing that you should do is make sure that you remove all the pigments when you're done. Clean off the brush by dipping it into the water, and then just using a paper towel works great to just clean it off. And how should I store it after this? Well, this is something that you shouldn't do. Leave it in the water like this. And especially not upside down, because that's going to ruin your brush. So in my opinion, you have two options here as far as leaving your brush. Either you leave it flat on the table like this, or you store your brush just like this. Make sure you don't have the tip downwards, because if you do that, you're gonna ruin this nice tip that you have here or the shape of the brush. So this is a no-no. Now let's talk about how to hold the brush and different brush strokes. Depending on what kind of brush strokes you're going for, you have to be able to hold the brush in several different ways. So not only like the same way that you hold a pencil. Let's look at a few techniques here, for example. If you put the brush down in an angle like this, you get a bigger surface touching the paper, and that's why you get a wider line. If you want a finer line, you have the brush more upwards. But as you can see, it's kind of hard doing a straight line. So one tip is using the support of your other fingers against the surface to make sure you get more control of the brush. The pressure of the brush also affects the width of the brush mark. So if you can see, if I'm pushing more, you will get a wider brush mark. And this is something that you will learn to master. Another great way to get straight lines, if that's what you're going for, is by using a metal ruler like this. You put it down in an angle against the paper, and automatically you will get a pretty straight and nice line. If you add pigment to your brush, but not that much water, then you have dry paint. And you do a brush stroke with the brush in an angle just like this, then you can get some interesting textures. And this is created thanks to the roughness of the paper. But if you add more water to the brush together with the pigment, and you do it in an angle, then instead you will get a nice smooth brush stroke, just like this. Being able to do different kind of brush strokes or textures will give you more options when you're painting. With a flat brush, you can dab it like this. You can make straight lines. That's awesome for the flat brush. And if you do it sideways, you can get wide lines like this. And this is something that's special for the flat brush. And you can also easily go from thicker lines to thinner lines in one movement, which is something that you would want sometimes. If you store your brushes with the hairs downwards, it might look like this. But brushes like this are useful for creating different textures as well. And another way of creating texture is by using a sponge, just like this one. And If you don't have brushes, did you know that you can use a piece of watercolor paper to paint with as well? You can dab it like this. You can do different marks or lines sideways. The same goes with a credit card. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you liked it, please leave a thumbs up. If you want to learn more from me and take part of my narrated videos and tutorials and much more, check out my Patreon. You have all the information down below. Okay guys, until I see you next time, bye bye.